Kicking off the list today at number 10 is Conan the Barbarian. Conan was born on a carnage-strewn battlefield in the hills of the westernmost region of Chimeria, all the way back in the Hyborian Age, aka around 13 to 10,000 BC. The fact that Conan was born on a battlefield was considered to be an omen that Conan would grow up to be a great warrior one day, and that was not wrong. He was one of the most accomplished swordsmen of the Hyborian Age and is often listed alongside King Arthur, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Zoro as one of the greatest fictional male sword fighters in history, which is a really cool thing to put on a resume. Conan has unusual strength, agility, and speed for a human being. He has lifted immense objects or enemies, even breaking the neck of a raging bull when he was still pretty young. It is said that he has the strength equivalent of about 10 to 20 men, but he has been knocked over by just 2 dudes before, so don't take that as a fact. More often than not, Conan relies upon his lightning-fast reflexes in combat situations, and they very rarely let him down. On top of that, he has a massive level of durability, and through years of dealing with sorcerers, magicians, and witches, he has even developed a moderate level of resistance to magic and mind control spells. Conan is a master warrior. He has a hardy survival instinct, is a master of stealth, and is multilingual. While primarily known as a wandering sellsword, Conan progressively became a master tactician, leading entire armies into battle, and eventually, Conan even became the king of Aquilonia, and also eventually a hero interacting with the heroes of the modern day. In at number 9, it's Red Sonja. If we are talking about Conan the Barbarian, then we need to talk about Red Sonja, because not only is she from the same time period, she's arguably even more capable than Mr. Barbarian himself. Red Sonja lived with her family in a humble home in the western Hyrcanian steppes. I don't know if I pronounced that right, so let me know in the comments down below. When she had just turned 17 years old, a group of mercenaries attacked, taking the lives of her father, Ivor, her mother, and her 2 younger brothers, and burning their house and all their possessions to the ground. Now she survived, but was then horribly mistreated by the leader of that group. Understandably, Sonja raged for some revenge. Answering this, the red goddess Skatok appeared to her and instilled incredible skill in the handling of swords and other weapons under the condition that she would never lay with a man unless he defeated her in combat, which is a weird kind of thing to say, I guess. Going forward as Red Sonja, she honed her skills with the blade and became a sellsword, eventually even slaying the evil wizard Kulan Gath, but he came back. Red Sonja was one of the most powerful and skilled swordsmen in any era, among both men and women. She was also in peak human physical condition, a martial arts expert, and possessed knowledge and experience in fighting the supernatural. And she beat Conan. So, number 8, Hercules. Hercules is the son of Zeus, Skyfather and supreme ruler of the gods of Olympus, and Alcmena, a mortal woman who lived over 3,000 years ago. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, arranged for her father Zeus to have a half-mortal son to be the world's champion. Zeus seduced the mortal queen Alcmena, pretending to be her husband, King Amphitryon. I'm sorry if I pronounced that too. Alcmena gave birth to the baby Hercules, and as an adult demigod in ancient Greece, Hercules achieved worldwide fame as he became the greatest hero of the ancient world, best known for his 12 labors. As the Olympian god of strength as well, Hercules' strength is unlimited, making him one of the strongest and most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe. As an infant, he was breastfed by his stepmother, Hera, queen of the Olympian gods, which increased his already demigod physiology to godlike levels. Hercules possessed the superhuman physical attributes of an Olympian god, but interestingly, some of his powers are actually superior to the vast majority of the other gods. Most recently, he has been a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he has also been part of the Avengers, the God Squad, Council of Godheads, the Mighty Avengers, the Secret Avengers, the Defenders, the Heroes for Hire, and, of course, S.H.I.E.L.D. Coming in at number 7 today is Dream. The Endless, featured in DC's Sandman story, are a group of 7 siblings: Death, Destiny, Despair, Desire, Delirium, Destruction, and the focus of our point today, Dream. These siblings represent fundamental aspects and forces of the Vertigo/DC universe, and are all immortal, ageless, and pretty much nigh omnipotent. The parents of the Endless were revealed to be Time, the embodiment of all time itself, father of the Endless, and Night, the embodiment of the infinite darkness that existed before the dawn of the universe, and mother of the Endless. So it's safe to say that these beings are probably pretty ancient, like 10 billion years old ancient. As for Dream himself, or Morpheus, he isn't so much a superhero as we are used to, but he is an extremely powerful, reluctant hero is what I would say, and his his journey to that status, from emotionless god to a being displaying very human-like emotions and characteristics, is the fundamental story of the Sandman itself. Dream dwells in a realm called the Dreaming, from where he controls the fundamental concept of fantasy and reality in the universe, as the line between the waking world and the dream world is quite thin. Coming in at number 6, it's Odin. While the god of thunder Thor almost made this list, his father was and sometimes is still a hero, and he is much older than his son, as you might be able to guess, because father and son relationships be like that. While Marvel plays a little fast and loose with Thor's age, it most recently has been said to be roughly 4,000 years old, but his daddy? Marvel Comics changed Odin's age a few times for the sake of stories, but we can assume that Odin is quite old, far more than a million years, as Odin was part of the Avengers of 1 million BC, and by that time, he was seemingly in his prime like Thor is now. So yes, the Allfather, creator of Asgard and ruler of the Norse pantheon of gods, is pretty damn old. Who would have thought? Not me. But he is certainly no pushover. Being the protector of the 10 realms, he is the strongest and wisest of all Asgardians. In his physical prime, he could lift 90 tons, but that number can be boosted up a whole lot to a whole other level thanks to Odin's ability to tap into the Odin Force, which has allowed him to headbutt Galactus into unconsciousness, which is really impressive. As an example of the power he wields, Odin had a fight with Seth, another god, which was waged on several planes of existence simultaneously and felt across infinite planes of reality. The energy released from their battle was so powerful, it shattered entire galaxies, reignited dying suns, and ripped the fabric of the multiverse itself. So, yeah. He's pretty nuts. Number 5, the Immortal. Due to an accident that happened approximately 3,000 years ago in the Image Comics Invincible universe, the man who became the Immortal was exposed to an unknown anomaly that gave him superhuman abilities that put him almost on par with Viltrumites. Outside of his incredible strength, speed, durability, stamina, and flight powers, the Immortal is, you guessed it, immortal. Oh. Able to regenerate at an insanely fast rate, regrowing limbs and organs, not needing food, water, or oxygen to survive, and being immune to all poisons, toxins, venoms, viruses, bacteria, parasites, pathogens, and allergens. However, funnily enough, there is a way to, quote, kill him. If the Immortal's head is separated from his torso, it needs to be manually reattached for his healing factor to finally kick in. But despite that, even when they aren't attached, he still remains perfectly preserved until the reattachment happens. He's been around for so long that he has been a knight, possibly under King Arthur, an explorer connected to Christopher Columbus in the Spanish Armada. He fought in the American Revolution, became President of the United States by taking the alias of Abraham Lincoln, became President of the United States by taking the alias of someone you may know, Abraham Lincoln, and he fought as a soldier in the First World War. In the 1930s is when he finally officially became a superhero, and more recently became a member of the Guardians of the Globe. Coming in at number 4, Exodus. Grand Duke Benny du Paris was a 12th century nobleman from medieval France, so he is probably one of the youngest people to make this list. As an adult, Bennett was a crusader for the Knights Templar sent to Jerusalem during the Crusades, and he even became best friends with Eobar Garrington, the Black Knight of that era. The two had set out on a quest to find the Tower of Power, when his abilities manifested after an encounter with the Phoenix Force. This granted Bennett some pretty powerful telepathic powers, but pretty quickly, these powers were then improved upon thanks to the mutant Apocalypse, and his ability to augment other individuals. Unfortunately, Apocalypse also caused Exodus to be trapped in a tomb until the modern day when he was awoken by Magneto and joined his cause, which you think would make him a villain, but he has become more of a hero as time has gone on. Exodus is one of the most powerful psionic mutants in existence, with such a pristine use of telekinesis and telepathy that he can even alter electrons and molecules. His power is so strong that Marvel even had to debuff him by making his powers dependent on his or others' level of faith in him. Still, pretty powerful though. Number 3, the Eternals. Way back in the day, the Celestials came to Earth when proto-humans began to emerge, meaning around 2 to 5 million years ago. That's a long freaking time. The Celestial first host performed genetic experiments on those early humans, resulting in 3 groups. The Immortal and Superior Eternals, the pretty grotesque and monstrous deviants, and just plain Jane regular humans. The Eternals, aka Homo Immortalis, were basically created to defeat defend the planet Earth, specifically from the deviants and to serve Celestials. They became somewhat silent defenders of Homo sapiens, that's us, secluding themselves and rarely directly engaging with us. They built super impressive cities like Olympia, Titanos, Oceania, and Polaria, and their names have become intertwined with heroes throughout ancient history, like Gilgamesh. They are all incredibly powerful and they are all immortal, being reborn if they ever actually are defeated. An average Eternal is intertwined with cosmic energy and can lift about 15 tons without using any form of telekinesis, but a few are able to lift up to 100 tons. Other Eternals specialize in different powers like telepathy and telekinesis, and all Eternals have the ability to join with one another to form the Unimind, made of light, mind, and pure energy. And I haven't even talked about the massive Eternals called the Hex, and I'm not going to, because we're moving on. Coming in at number 2, Eternal Warrior. Gilad Anipata from Valiant Comics was ancient before the rise of the Pharaohs, and apparently will also survive the fall of nations yet to come. Gilad, also known as the Eternal Warrior, is the youngest of 3 Eternal brothers. His siblings are Ivar, aka Time Walker, and Aram, aka Armstrong. They are all immortal and were born before recorded history, so that's a long time ago. The Eternal Warrior himself is a sworn protector to the Geomancers, who are basically humans who have a special bond with the spirit of the earth itself. When the current Geomancer is accidentally taken out by Obadiah Archer, Gilad is driven by his duty to track down Obadiah and exact revenge. Only problem is, Archer happens to be one half of Archer and Armstrong. Armstrong being Gilad's older brother that we just talked about, who he hasn't spoken to in decades. Armstrong tries to protect his best buddy Archer from his brother, but the relentless Gilad eventually catches up to them, and the duo's only solution now is to find a new Geomancer. Archer and Armstrong eventually track down the new Geomancer, Kay McHenry, who convinces Gilad to not obliterate the duo, which Gilad is more than capable of doing with his thousands of years of fighting experience, his mastery in tactics, and being one of the greatest warriors on Earth. Not to mention his exceptional strength, inhuman durability, and endurance, and the ability to heal from pretty much any wound. And finally, in at number 1, it's Martian Manhunter. Martian Manhunter, aka John Johns, or John Jones on Earth, is the last of his race of Martians, and he is extremely powerful, and should never be slept on, but he usually is. He speaks with the resolve and intelligence of someone who's been around for a very hot minute, and that's because he has been. According to DC, he is in the ballpark of around, or over, 220 million years old. John arrived on Earth after he was pulled there through space and time by a teleportation beam during an experiment conducted by Dr. Saul Erdl, who passed away from the shock of actually finding a Martian shortly after this. But way before that, John's race was practically wiped out a long time ago, leaving him completely alone and isolated. But now, pulled forward in time and finally on Earth with no one to tell him what the hell was going on, he eventually used his shape-shifting abilities to become a detective operating in Middletown, America. For a long time, he mainly operated from the safety of his human persona before he eventually exposed himself to the world, not like that, and became a founding member of the Justice League, and also one of its most powerful and ancient members as well.
At number 10, we have Apocalypse. One of Earth's very first mutants, this immortal threat blurs the line between man and deity. Originally called En-Sabah-Nur, which translates either to the morning light or the seven lights, he was born in ancient Egypt, and after being abandoned by his tribe at birth on account of his monstrous physique, he was found and raised by a ruthless nomadic warrior tribe where he learned the principle that would guide him for the rest of eternity: that only the toughest, most ruthless and pitiless few would and should survive. And thanks to his mutant immortality, which comes from his ability to alter his own molecular structure at will, Nur was able to integrate his body with celestial technology over the eons, which basically uncaps his power level by allowing him to spontaneously bestow upon himself any superpower of his choosing whenever he wants, thus cementing Apocalypse as one of the most powerful ancient villains in comic history. And by the way, if you're digging the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. If you haven't done those things already, I'd really appreciate it if you did, because it helps me out. Thanks guys. At number 9, we have Circe the Weaver. Immortal witch and longtime enemy of the Amazons of Paradise Island, Circe is probably best known mythologically speaking as she who transforms people into animal hybrids, which she calls her Ani-Men. Though she sports a wide variety of many other magical abilities, a lot of which we won't be getting into today as they're all pretty typical for magic wielders. But I will mention her Krona chronokinetic ability, allowing her to freeze temporal reality and pull herself and others out of the moment, a supremely useful and powerful ability. Alright, so how does one go about acquiring mastery over this awesome magic? Gods, naturally. See, Circe was once the princess of Colis, and after being wedded off to the heir of one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the land, she discovered that the dude was a brute, a drunk, and a liar. Arranged marriages, am I right? Anyways, she eventually capped him, which led to her being hunted by the dude's family until one day, lost and in exile, she was approached by the goddess Hecate, which bestowed upon her the Circle of the Witch Mark, representing 1/5 of Hecate's immortal soul, thus granting Circe mastery of magic by which she could fulfill her desires of dominance and revenge, and so began the legend of Circe the Weaver. At number 8 we have Kulan Gath. The sorcerer who would become Kulan Gath was once a young slave purchased by the original Kulan Gath, who was a sorcerer from the cruel kingdom of Stygia during the Hyborian era. Eventually, after withstanding years of abuse from his master, the boy ended up believing that Kulan intended to slay him, and so he decided to act first, if you catch my drift, by poisoning the mage and feeding his body to the pigs. The boy then took possession of the fallen sorcerer's magic library, and after mastering the magic, he went on to make the Kulan Gath name infamous for centuries to come. The mage would then go on to gruesomely defeat Murky Ra, the sorcerer supreme of his time, so you know we're dealing with some powerful magic here. Kulan's been slain and revived almost too many times to count, thus enabling him to persist across millennia. At number 7 we have Hela. As the Asgardian goddess of the unalived, and with strength considerably greater than most Asgardians and even matching that of Thor, Hela is undeniably one of the most dangerous ancient villains on this list. Fans of the MCU's Ragnarok will recognize her as Odin's daughter, but the comics actually allude to her being the daughter of Loki, Asgardian god of mischief. And even though the Nords warned Odin that Hela would prove to be a great threat to Asgard, Odin decides to make Hela goddess and ruler of the spirits of the unalive, as if that's gonna help him somehow. As Hela grew, she longed to bring more Asgardian souls under her control, especially that of Odin and Thor, and so she and her father Loki attempted to bring Ragnarok by eliminating Balder and then attacking Asgard with a horde of monsters. That is, until their plan was thwarted by Odin after he used his power to revive Balder. Guess that's why she decided to take out Odin first in the movie. At number 6 we have Mephisto. The origin story behind this primordial demon has been lost to time, as he's certainly older than any mortal who's ever existed. He's essentially every demon stereotype rolled into one, as he's the ruler of his own infernal dimension and often tries to get people to make soul bargains. As a matter of fact, it's thanks to these very deals that we're giving characters like Ghost Rider, the crew of the Flying Dutchman. Heck, he even directly instructed or inspired the wraths of terror brought on by the likes of Apocalypse and even Thanos. Marvel goes so far as to claim that it was Mephisto who disguised himself as a snake to get Adam and Eve kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So remember kids, if a demon is offering you a deal that sounds too good to be true, it's cause it is. But hey, at least you're usually getting something of equal value back for your soul. I've seen more treacherous contracts from cell phone providers. At number 5 we have Nekron. You ever hear of the philosophical darkness that preceded the light? Well, his name is Nekron, and he's the leader of the Black Lantern Corps and the Lord of the Unliving. And that wasn't even a monetization friendly self-censor either. That's the actual title of the land that he rules over, where the souls of the unalive await passage to their final residence, like a sort of purgatory. And it's from these unliving souls that Nekron draws his power. He first became a threat to Earth after becoming aware of a reality's existence when an interdimensional rift is accidentally opened between the two dimensions after a paradox occurs in which an immortal being was banished to the realm of the dead. The unalive! Unalive, YouTube. Anyhow, desiring the world that he was now able to see, but being too large to pass through the rift, Nekron imbues that aforementioned immortal with enormous power and sends him to go terminate the Guardians of the Universe in an attempt to increase the size of the rift. And that immortal, whose name I don't want to give away because he may or may not be the top spot on this list, does his part and sends several Guardians and Green Lanterns to go see Nekron, if you catch my drift. That is until Hal Jordan managed to enter Nekron's realm, inciting the spirits of the recently defeated Lanterns to rebel against Nekron, distracting him long enough for the Lanterns on the other side to seal up the rift, albeit with Hal trapped inside. Poor guy. At number 4 we have Shuma-Gorath. Now you may recognize him as the dimension-hopping Gargantos from Multiverse of Madness, but make no mistake, that one-eyed monster in the movie is modeled after Shuma-Gorath. They just couldn't use the name in the film because of legal reasons, because everyone knows how much lawyers love to ruin everything we love for the money. Oh, I'm sorry. You want to call this fictional one-eyed tentacle monster a particular name? To the courts! Jokes aside, Shuma owes his apparent ancientness to the fact that he belongs to a group of cosmic nightmares called the Old Ones, so he's not exactly trying to hide it. After conquering and ruling over hundreds of dimensions, Shuma-Gorath and his gang of geriatrics came to the Marvel continuity realm on numerous occasions, the first of which being well over 1,000,000 million years ago, though on each visit he goes on conquering Earth, tyrannizing the people, and commanding human sacrifices and tribal wars. That is until he's inevitably banished by sorcerers or gods, at least temporarily. Shuma's never discouraged, however, because when you've lived through countless eternities, what's a few 100,000 years? At number 3 we have Ra's al Ghul, whose name, by the way, literally translates from Arabic as head of the demon. Just badass. The first mention of Ra's al Ghul in recorded history comes from the Crusades back in 1285. And if that's not ancient enough for you, too bad, deal with it, man. Even way back then, Ra's was so feared that the people of his time gave his name the Voldemort treatment, never so much as uttering his name, as he was rumored to be a creature unbound by even death itself, with the power to crush entire civilizations in the palm of his hand. Unbeknownst to the populace at the time, he owed much of his claim to fame to the League of Assassins, which he founded, who were so good at doing their job unnoticed that all of their nefarious accomplishments were accredited singularity to the Ghul, or at least that's how it was in the beginning. Ra and his gang have been able to survive all these centuries thanks to bathing regularly in supernatural Lazarus pits, which grants Ghul immorality, heals his injuries, even flushes out your pores. At number 2 we have Nathaniel Richards, otherwise known as Kang the Conqueror. You heard me right, ladies and gents. He who remains at the end of time is simultaneously one of the most ancient beings in the Marvel universe. How can that be, you ask? 2 words, my friend: time travel, or dimension hopping, depending on how you want to look at it. And for as simple as those 2 words are, they make for one of the most convoluted characters in comic book history, as there are innumerable iterations of the character spanning across countless eons. Like, for example, there are versions of Nathaniel who become Rama-Tut before becoming Kang, others who after becoming Kang become Rama-Tut again, only to then become either Immortus or Scarlet Centurion, and or back to Kang. Some flip back and forth between Rama-Tut and Kang before becoming Mr. Griffin, while other Kangs don't become Kang at all, but instead become Iron Lad, and then from Iron Lad you get Kid Immortus, and then back to Kang. Yeah, it's messy. But the point here is that even though Nathaniel Richards was born in the furthest future, making him one of the youngest beings in the Marvel Universe, he is simultaneously one of the most ancient villains, as thanks to his time machine, he was able to instate himself as the pharaoh in ancient Egypt. At number 1 we have Krona. So if I'm gonna go and bend the rules on what qualifies as an ancient villain with Kang, there's no way I'm gonna leave out the guy whose time traveling shenanigans caused the very birth of evil itself. No kidding, guys, time travel ain't a joke. Born amongst the race of beings responsible for the creation of the lantern rings, that being the Malthusians, Krona was a scientist who allowed his thirst for knowledge to corrupt his morality, creating experiments to the detriment of the entire cosmos. His forbidden experiments culminated in the time machine that would allow himself to witness the beginning of time itself, where, or should I say when, he was able to catch a glimpse of the hand of creation depositing the speck that would become the universe. But at that instant, his time machine exploded, fracturing the universe into infinite shatters that would become the multiverse, and simultaneously unleashing the primordial evil. This was the final straw that enabled the Malthusians to take action against Krona, converting him into a state of pure energy which was sent to circle the universe for all of eternity. But eventually it ended up in the dimension of the unalive, and thus introducing Nekron to our reality. Gee, thanks! What a helpful chap. I mean, who wouldn't want not 1, but 2 primordial evils adding more chaos and destruction to our already hectic lives? I mean, it's not like we were lacking in the villain department after your first screw up. Some people just never learn.
Starting off our list at number 10 is Xena Warrior Princess. I bet you didn't expect to see this one. Sure, Xena Warrior Princess started out as a TV show, but the character was popular enough to get a few comic book series all of her own. From bigger publishers too, like Dark Horse and Dynamite Comics. Way back in the day, in her early 20s, Xena proved to be a courageous leader when she led her village against a local warlord. But they were defeated, and Xena, being one of the only survivors, was banished. Eventually, she formed a relationship with another warlord known as Boreas, and she even joined him, becoming a warlord herself. Xena the Warlord became known and feared across ancient China, Siberia, Japan, Norway, Britannia, and Greece as a very capable warlord, earning her the name Warrior Princess, but also the name Destroyer of Nations. Luckily, this destroyer changed her ways and instead became a protector of the innocent, traveling with her companions all across the ancient world. Number 9. Hippolyta. This queen's history begins thousands of years ago. Around 1300 BC, the Greek pantheon held a meeting convened by the goddesses. They were discussing the creation of a race of humans that would champion their ideals. Now the male gods, including Zeus and Ares, did not seem too interested, and Hera did not wish to go against her husband, so it was left to the other 5 primary Greek goddesses. They decided to travel into the underworld, where they came upon the Well of Souls, where the souls of all the women who were taken out by man's hatred were gathered. The goddesses took these souls and went and dropped them into a lake in Greece. The souls mixed with the clay and the stone of the lake bed to form the Amazons, and the first one to emerge from the waters was Hippolyta. The goddesses appointed Hippolyta to be queen, and they decreed that the Amazons were to spread the message of peace, tolerance, and equality by being super dope warriors. Yes, Wonder Woman is also pretty ancient too, but Mama came first, so here we are. Number 8, Black Adam. Okay, so there are 2 different main origin stories for Black Adam. In the pre-New 52 era of DC, circa 1200 BC, the wizard Shazam became a high priest to the pharaoh Ramses II of Egypt. This is where he met the young prince Teth Adam of Kahndaq. Teth Adam was Ramses' son. Teth Adam impressed the wizard with his fairness and decency, and boom, he was granted the power. But in the more recent continuity, Teth Adam was born in Egypt in the 26th century BCE along the banks of the Nile as part of the Kahndaqi tribe, and it didn't take too long for him to be forced into a life of unwilling servitude. His entire family lost their lives except for his nephew Amon. Amon would save Teth Adam's life, which got him the recognition of the wizard Shazam, who turned Amon into his champion. Amon shared this power with his uncle Teth Adam, but not seeing eye to eye on how to use the power, Black Adam took his own nephew off the board and stole his power. This was way before he was either banished, stuck in a scarab, or locked away in a tomb, depending on which era you want to talk about. Also, for the trolls out there, I know Adam is primarily a villain, but he has also been a hero, even joining the Justice Society and the Justice League, so get off my back. Number 7, X-O Manowar. In the world of Valiant Comics' X-O Manowar, a long time ago, aka 402 AD, a barbarian tribe known as the Visigoths were battling the Romans for territory in Italy. One of these barbarians was Eric of Dacia, a warrior of the Visigoths and the nephew of the king. After the Romans sneakily captured the barbarians' women and children, Eric gathered together a group of warriors and went off to attack the Romans at night. On their way to the Roman stronghold though, the Visigoths came across strangely dressed warriors who turned out to be an alien species known as the Vine. Using their advanced weapons, the Vine easily defeated the barbarians, and the remaining Visigoths were taken aboard the alien mothership. Now, whilst being herded on board the ship, Eric and his friends managed to overpower their jailer and escape to find shelter within another area of the ship, where they witnessed a Vine ritual in which a priest presented a chosen warrior with a semi-sentient armor called Shanhara. After a number of years, Eric and the others finally managed to gather enough tools and escape their cages. They made their way to the armory, where they found themselves trapped by Commander Trill and his soldiers. But in what could have been their final moments, Shanhara had deemed Eric worthy, granting him superhuman abilities and the means to escape his captors, eventually becoming a hero in the modern era. Number 6. Valkyrie. There have been a few people to take up the role of Valkyrie, but the first was Brunhilde. Back in the day, Odin realized that he needed to give man a paradise to live in after passing on. Thank you. Odin chose a princess named Brunhilde to be his Valkyrie, making her responsible for taking the souls of the warriors who perished in battle with honor and bringing them to Valhalla. Brunhilde led the rest of the Valkyrie as a group of warrior goddesses who would appear over the battlefields of mortal worshippers of the Asgardian gods and choose which of them were worthy to be taken to Valhalla. Brunhilde led this group for centuries. Like the other Asgardians, Brunhilde had godly powers, but she also possessed some Valkyrie-specific traits, like the ability to perceive and sense the coming of death on a person, the power to teleport to Asgard through willpower, and she was one of the most capable fighters the Asgardians had to offer outside of Thor and maybe a few others. Number 5. Gaia. Speaking of Thor though, last time we talked about Thor's papa, Odin, and for this list, I think we should talk about Thor's mama, Gaia. Gaia was one of the elder gods who materialized on Earth way before any life ever appeared here. Unfortunately, the rest of the gods, following the example of the serpent elder god Set, started consuming each other, which turned all but Gaia into demons. In order to better protect life on Earth, Gaia summoned the Demiurge and mated with it to give birth to her first son ever, Demogorge the God Eater. This Demogorge devoured all the demons except those that escaped, like Set and Chthon. Gaia then merged with the Earth itself and dedicated herself to guiding evolution, and that sounds pretty heroic to me. She is one of the oldest and most powerful deities in Marvel Comics, which makes her and Odin's eventual son, Thor, even more of a force to be reckoned with. Number 4, Hawkman. Hawkman is a bit of a doozy to talk about. Essentially, he has two main origins. He was either a space cop or a reincarnated prince. Since we are talking old and ancient today, we will focus on the reincarnated prince story. Basically, Hawkman's secret identity is Carter Hall, an archaeologist and museum curator who is actually a reincarnation of the ancient Egyptian prince Khufu. Khufu, who would become known as Hawkman, discovered an alien spacecraft from the planet Thanagar, powered by an anti-gravity metal element called the Nth metal, which transformed his soul and doomed him and his love to be reincarnated over and over and over again throughout time. Some of his incarnations include Brian Kent, the Silent Knight from 5th century Britain, Conrad von Grimm, the son of a blacksmith in 14th century Germany, Captain John Smith of the 16th century, Hannibal Hawks, the Nighthawk in the American Old West, Detective James Wright, a Pinkerton detective in the 20th century, and finally, Carter Hall himself. Number 3, Venom. Since we all know Venom as being an enemy of Spider-Man, it's easy to forget that he has been around for a much longer amount of time than the web slinger himself, at least in the fictional world. The symbiote that later became known as Venom was spawned at some point during the reign of the Dark Elder God Null, which is a long one, and there is no specific Earth year when this happened, so it's hard to say just how ancient this symbiote actually is, but we know he had a life long before encountering Spider-Man. Unfortunately, the symbiote's memories have all been altered or erased a whole whack of times. It has been said that Venom was the 998th of its lineage, hatching from a clutch of eggs in a cavern on Clintar. That's the symbiote homeworld. Though it does have memories of being present on Gore's homeworld as well, so it's a little confusing. Basically, in the ancient past, the symbiote was once the loyal thrall of Null, but at some point the symbiote refused to obey his wishes anymore, and Venom was cast out of the hive, doomed to wander aimlessly across the cosmos. The symbiote eventually discovered the Kree explorers, who decided to harvest it for further study. It was then bonded to a soldier named Tel-Kar and underwent months of training alongside him before they were dispatched to fight in the Kree-Skrull War. Before eventually leaving Tel-Kar, and after a whack more adventures, the symbiote ended up becoming bonded to Spider-Man during Secret Wars. Number 2, Etrigan. Etrigan the demon was the firstborn of Belial, who was such a handful that Belial exiled Etrigan's mother to Masak Mavdil and told his son that his antics drove her away. That's a bad dad. I don't think this is the son's fault. His antics, that we just talked about, ended up even driving Belial out of hell for several decades, returning with another son born of a mortal witch named Merlin. Etrigan was originally summoned to Earth to serve Merlin in a desperate final attempt to protect Camelot from the evil witch Morgane Le Fay. Merlin bound the demon to a mortal man named Jason, and while Merlin went into hiding to rest, these two lived a very long and brutal life through history. Basically, how it would go is that Etrigan incited war and strife, and in return, Jason gained wealth and status. Not a horrible idea, but despite sharing the same body, the demon and his host are usually at odds with each other, and Jason retains a lot of guilt based on Etrigan's actions, which I think played a part in him being a bit more heroic, or as heroic as a demon can be. But finally, in at number 1, it's Thor. Being the son of Odin the Allfather, who appeared in part 1, and Gaia, an elder god who appeared on this list, Thor is incredibly old, approximately 4,000 years, although at other times it has been said to be even longer. Thor has all the incredible powers of the Asgardians, but boosted to a whole other level thanks to his mother's elder god status. As the god of strength as well as thunder, he is one of the strongest Marvel characters, being able to either defeat or stalemate astronomically stronger beings like the Midgard Serpent, the Hulk, the Silver Surfer, Gladiator, and Hercules. His stamina lets him basically fight forever, and he's next to completely invulnerable, not to mention his weather and energy manipulation and the use of his hammer, which make this guy almost impossible to bring down. Even when he isn't in possession of his hammer and is just Thor Odin's son, he is still a force to be reckoned with, and especially recently, he keeps getting more and more boost to his power. This character has been around for an incredibly long time, and he just gets more and more powerful as time goes on.
And it's Hercules. I think we all know the story of Hercules, whatever version you remember. The Disney animated movie, the DC version, the Roman or the Greek version, it's all generally the same thing. And I mean, even after that, this guy has a rap sheet of like 25 other heroic things he did, just like because he wanted to. A major factor in the well-known tragedy surrounding Hercules is the hatred that the goddess Hera, wife of Zeus, had for him. Because while there were many illegitimate offspring that Zeus, sired, let's say, Hercules was the son of an affair that Zeus had with a mortal woman. And not just any mortal woman, but a mortal that Zeus wanted so badly that he disguised himself as her husband in order to lay with her, and ordered Helios, the god of the sun, to not let the sun rise for 72 hours so that his one last night with her would last. Yeah, so not only is he the bastard of a mortal woman, he's also the product of a forced 3-day night, which I guess doesn't really bother anyone living in like Alaska or Norway, because the whole 6 months of night thing, not anything weird.
Number 9. Odin. Odin ended up joining the Stone Age Avengers sometime after he actually was said to have created the humans on Midgard, which was then known as Asheim. In doing so, he had disappointed his father Bor, who decided to punish Odin by hurting the humans. Now, as someone who often seems pretty detached from human suffering later in his life, it's pretty wild to think that Odin possibly created them and was perhaps one of the first cosmic beings to actually care for them as a superhero. And I know what you're thinking, but Amanda, we all know Odin is super old. Yeah, you know that, but did you know he was this heroic? Because I always find it very surprising myself. Odin ended up returning to Asheim to act as its protector and also to learn how to better control Mjolnir, which was his hammer at the time. He ended up befriending multiple prehistoric superheroes, joining the Avengers of 1 million BCE, and he also ended up developing a deeply romantic relationship with his teammate, the Lady Phoenix. In fact, it was even revealed that the Phoenix was actually the true mother of his son, Thor, because that's what's happening now, so there we go.
And it ate Blue Beetle. In 1964, during the Silver Age of Comics, Charlton Comics revised the character of Dan Garrett, the original Blue Beetle, for a new Blue Beetle series. Charlton's new Blue Beetle retained the original's name, but no powers or backstory, making him a different character. This Beetle was an archaeologist version of Dan, who obtained a number of superhuman powers including super strength, flight, supervision, ability to generate energy blasts from a mythical scarab that he found during a dig in Egypt, where it had been used to imprison an evil mummified pharaoh, because of course it was, which gave way for the DC Comics version of Jaime Reyes. DC's introduction of Jaime Reyes in 2006 retconned and expanded upon the Blue Beetle mythos, but given that the scarab was found during a dig in Egypt, where it was used as an attempt to overthrow Vandal Savage back in the 26th century BCE. Yeah, that's pretty ancient to me, okay? I mean, the scarab was created by Nabu, for God's sakes.
Number 7. Iron Fist. Fan Fei is the Iron Fist of the Stone Age Avengers, also known as the Avengers of 1 million BCE. Fan Fei is actually the reason why the ritual to become the Iron Fist and gain its unique powers was all about fighting Shao Lao in a battle to the death. This wasn't, however, because Kunlun wanted to challenge Fan at the time and believe she should, be their champion. This actually happened as the result of a punishment. Fan Fei, you see, was a kung fu master who had been trained since birth in Kunlun, but her curiosity of the outside world caused her to sort of leave Kunlun in secret. She came across cavemen who were helpless against the beasts that basically often attacked them, and she decided she was going to help them. Fan sought to help these people by teaching and training them herself in the ways of kung fu. However, it was forbidden in Kunlun to share your knowledge, and when her people found out, they marked her as a criminal. As punishment, her students were brought to Shao Lao and basically fed to the dragon. Forced to watch, Fan Fei went into a rage, breaking her shackles, seeking to share in the same demise as her students, becoming deeply distraught. However, when she went up against Shao Lao, she struck the dragon and her fist went right through, killing it, and coating her fist in its blood, giving her the power to channel her chi into fiery fists, and leaving her with a dragon mark, which marks her as the Iron Fist.
And at 6, Dr. Fate. Nabu the Wise was a Lord of Order and cosmic being who arrived at Earth billions of years ago to take on a proactive role in battling the Lords of Chaos. A cosmic being with near limitless magical power, his spirit resides in the Helmet of Fate and is the source of the great power held by those who wear the mantle of Dr. Fate. Dr. Fate is just the helmet. Fun fact, you all knew that. Dr. Fate's origins begin over 10 billion years ago, which I personally think qualifies as ancient, or maybe even older than that, if there is anything older than that. I don't know. My senior year Comtech teacher was pretty old. But not long after the formation of the universe, were there born two elemental forces, the Lords of Order and the Lords of Chaos. You can kind of see where this conflict is going. On the world called Celia, the Lords of Order manifested themselves, the first sentient race in the universe, and a race of incorporeal magical beings at that. After millennia, circa 3500 BCE, the Lords of Order descended onto Earth and then became Nabu the Wise, who was also an advisor to the pharaohs of Egypt. He's old, okay? I don't know what else I need. I said 10 billion years. I think that's pretty solid.
Number 5, Conan the Barbarian. That's right, Conan is an ancient superhero who actually also hails from Marvel. Not only that, but he was also an Avenger. Despite technically being a Marvel superhero, Conan is also kind of otherworldly, hailing from the sword and fantasy genre of comics. Although for Marvel, Conan is still labeled as an Earth 616 character, hailing from their main comic book reality. He does, however, come from the Hyborian Age, an old hero from the past. But he was one of the heroes still summoned by Doctor Strange and Elektra when they brought together their own team of Savage Avengers to stand against the threat of Kulan Gath. This went down in Jerry Dugan and Adam Gorham's Savage Avengers series, which I still really want to read. It looks super good. It just looks like such a great time. And Conan's presence on the team is definitely part of the reason for my motivation to jump into this series, hopefully in the near future. I have a lot of things to read.
And at 4, Mr. Majestic. I put this here because I like the word majestic, but also this is kind of weird. Mr. Majestic is a Wildstorm comic superhero created by H.K. Prager and Jim Lee. He made his first appearance in Wild Cats number 11 as a backup story, but he's known for being the strongest superhero in the Wildstorm universe, and he shares quite a few similarities with Superman. But given that Wildstorm is owned by DC, there shouldn't really be any conflict there. Mr. Majestic is originally from the planet Kara and was known as Magistros, but yeah, this isn't like Superman at all. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you saying that? He has 2 kids, Kanesha and Magistrate, but there was also an infertility crisis in his homeworld, which resulted in only 1 child per woman. Yeah, so how did this happen? Well, Magistros and Coda warrior Lady Xena, who's also later known as other things, it doesn't matter. They were chosen not to breed, but since Coda warriors became priestesses after giving birth, Xana's mother pretended that Kanesha was stillborn and then claimed to have given birth to her herself. Yeah, so basically Kanesha passed off her daughter as her sister, which is a whole... They're old. It's old. It's an old thing. I don't...
Number 3, Starbrand. Vin is the Starbrand in 1 million BCE. He ends up becoming the Starbrand after leaving his tribe. He left them because he believed he did not belong due to the fact that he realized he was gay. Something that seemed to be unacceptable to his people in that time. On his journey, he sought out a garden he had seen in a dream, which it turned out appeared to be the biblical paradise known as the Garden of Eden. Once he found it, he also found Burke. Also no vowels. No vowels for these people in prehistoric times. The 2 men became lovers, but would eventually be separated after Burke died in a deviant attack. It seemed the deviants wanted the garden for themselves. The attack resulted in a cave-in, and while Burke did not survive, Vin did, finding the body of a dinosaur who had previously been the Starbrand. Vin was imbued with its powers and fought against those who had killed Burke. However, in the process, this also destroyed the garden. Vin would go on to become the hero known as Starbrand in his time and join up with the other Stone Age Avengers of 1 million BCE.
But ultimately, in number 2, Doctor Strange Fate. Doctor Strange Fate is the amalgam of Doctor Strange, Charles Xavier, and Dr. Fate. Yeah, they're present in the amalgam universe of Earth 9602, and given that both the Sorcerer Supreme and Dr. Fate are present, I think that this qualifies as ancient. Dr. Fate alone just makes that happen. Strange Fate learned that 2 keys controlled by Access would restore the DC Comics and Marvel Comics universes to their own worlds, which would result in the destruction of the amalgam universe and therefore him. So, to keep his universe intact, Doctor Strange Fate recruits Jade Nova, Skulk, and White Witch to capture Access and bring him to Strange Fate so that the amalgam universe can remain active. But it turns out that he was actually a part of a problem, or a part of the problem. That's a story for another day. But Doctor Strange, yes, the real one, preserved the Amalgam universe in a pocket dimension, essentially making it its own multiverse in a sense. But I also bring this up because I like the Amalgam universe, okay? It's cool. Iron Lantern, Lobo the Duck, hell yeah.
Number 1. Man-Thing Sorcerer Supreme. Perhaps even more surprising is a reality where the Man-Things rule the planet. Their version of the 1 million BCE Avengers team is filled exclusively with Man-Things as a result. One of these Man-Things is known as the Sorcerer Supreme on this planet in the reality we know as Earth 91. Unfortunately, we do not get to know too much about this version of Man-Thing, as he is killed by the Masters of Evil when they come to his reality in Avengers Forever issue number 5 from 2022. What we do know is that, like Dr. Stephen Strange and many other Sorcerer Supremes, this Man-Thing does seem to possess a cape, although it is a bit shorter than Strange's, I would say. His version of the Eye of Agamotto, or his version of the third eye, I'm not really sure what's going on with this, also seems to be something that he has, but he wears inside his chest, or on his chest. I think Dr. Strange ends up with a third eye at one point, but he's also got the Eye of Agamotto, so I don't know. Instead of Man-Thing wearing this anywhere else or having it on a chain or a necklace, implying, that this eye is a part of him. Or perhaps it's simply, like I said, just a third eye, and it's just on the chest. I feel like that wouldn't be, I guess he doesn't really wear it close because he's a Man-Thing, so actually I guess it'd be fine. Number 10. The Question. In the Prime Earth continuity, the Question, or a version of the Question, is revealed to be one of the oldest beings in the world of DC. This is revealed after we learn that the Question was one of the criminals in essence that the Circle of Eternity, located at the Rock of Eternity, chose to punish for their crimes against humanity. This group of beings who were punished were known as the Trinity of Sin. The Question would go on to become a hero following this. This version of the Question is largely a mysterious figure who has not appeared as much, probably because the original version of the character, Vic Sage, and his predecessor, Renee Montoya, ended up both returning to the comics recently. What we do know is that the Question had his memory erased from history and from himself, with even his face being left completely featureless, so he could never remember who he was. This was part of his punishment, but also done to guarantee that the Question would not be able to rise up once more as he had threatened to do originally, since he would no longer be able to remember what exactly he had done and why in the first place. So how can he return if he doesn't even know, why he was doing it in the first place? And apparently, we may never get to know any of this either, unless somebody returns to tell the rest of this version of the Question's tale. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you also love superheroes that are surprisingly old, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. The Eternals. The Eternals are simply a group of heroes most people don't often think of, which is why I'm including them here. Despite them coming to the MCU, I would still say there are tons out there who have fallen off the MCU bandwagon recently and kind of just weren't particularly compelled to watch this film. So there are still a lot who do not know about the Eternals, which is unfortunate. This is a huge shame, I think, because the Eternals are really a cool group of heroes who have existed for millennia. Initially, their origin was that they were prehistoric humans who were basically modified by celestial tech, turned into their own race of beings. Later on, we'd get an additional bit of information on their origin in terms of kind of how they worked, how they operated, but them being resurrected by the Great Machine on the regular anytime they died. That's how they were eternal, almost being like kind of androids with a soul in a sense at one point. The Great Machine is actually also Earth, which is both a big blue ball that everyone lives on and, at its core, an actual machine, a resurrection machine in part. Its survival is intrinsic to the survival of Earth and all life forms living on it, and it was, up until recently, also tied to the Eternals, meaning that for Earth to continue, the Eternals would also have to continue to be called into existence. The Eternals, being ancient heroes, were initially the enemies of the Deviants, who were also created by the Celestials. They defended Earth against the Dark Celestials, or they tried to, and have also become ingrained in human mythology, with them being the real-world heroes from ancient epics and folklore. Hawkgirl. While Hawkman recently appeared in Black Adam in the DCEU, which has been rebranded with their highly anticipated reset impending as simply the DCU, Hawkman isn't the only hero out there who is ancient among the Justice Society. And no, I'm not talking about Dr. Fate, who also is pretty old. In fact, many people probably didn't even know that Hawkman was really even ancient per se. He doesn't look old, that's for sure, but He is, in fact, not in body, but in soul. Hawkman is the reincarnated soul of ancient Egyptian Prince Khufu Qatar. Carter Hall is only the latest in a line of incarnations of the prince in the comics, and his love, Sheara, was also reincarnated as well throughout the years, becoming known as the hero Hawkgirl and also as Hawkwoman. Later, this origin would be retconned, tweaked somewhat, so they'd actually be even older than ancient Egypt, instead becoming ancient aliens from the planet Thanagar, who simply came to Earth. Their original souls in this version of the tale were each believed to belong to Shra and Qatar the Deathbringer, who were both cursed to be reincarnated alongside each other throughout eternity. Number 7. Gaia. Gaia is someone that we perhaps don't think of as being an ancient superhero, because, well, we just don't really think of Gaia that much. She hails from Marvel Comics and is the goddess of Earth. Gaia is seen as one of the oldest gods that Marvel has to offer us, being one of their elder gods. In fact, Gaia is kind of one of the only elder gods who could be seen as heroic or good. At least one of I would say she's up there, considering she is one of the few who managed to avoid becoming a demon. She also actively sought out the demiurge in order to produce offspring that would help to rid the universe of the other elder gods who had been corrupted after they became demonic, giving birth to Atum, who then became the Demigorge, the God Eater. She's probably also one of the oldest heroes mentioned on this list at all, so there's also that. Number 6. Nubia. Nubia is possibly even older than most other Amazons, who are generally known for being old and immortal just standardly. In Infinite Frontier, her story was retconned so that she was no longer a woman held and mistreated against her will for a long time, but a princess reborn in the Well of Souls. Nubia was born from the Well of Souls reincarnated around the same time that Princess Diana was born, and the two grew up often being thought of as sisters. And if you're wondering why I was mentioning that she might be older than some of the other Amazons, that's just because she's reincarnated. So although Nubia in her own form is around the same age as Diana, she also got an old soul, you know what I mean? She would spend many years as the guardian of Doom's doorway, and would act as a loyal supporter to Queen Hippolyta, even when it seemed that she had betrayed her. In fact, Nubia's loyalty to the Amazons in the current continuity has not failed, and she even recently was chosen to be the new queen of the Amazons. And we're not just talking about the Amazons of Themyscira either, but in fact all known Amazons in existence, as there are actually multiple Amazonian tribes in existence throughout the world. Number 5. Lady Phoenix. Well, I did think that Phoenix was a little too on the nose for my part 1 of this list. There were some who actually requested her in the comments, so fair enough. Some people want to know more about her. And since she was featured in our thumbnail / cover photo for that first part of our list, I felt for all you loyal nerds who came to this part 2, I should oblige you and tell you more about Lady Phoenix, who is the woman we featured on that thumb. She is also a member of the 1 million BCE Avengers, also nicknamed the Stone Age or Prehistoric Avengers. Before she was the host of the Phoenix, she was simply known as Firehair, named after her bright red hair, which left her abandoned by her parents only shortly after she was born into the world. Anyone who their tribe deemed basically different in some way was sacrificed in this manner. This was also to be the fate of Firehair, but she was rescued by wolves, so she ended up being okay. She grew up among her pack, but eventually joined up with the Tribe Without Fear, a group of prehistoric mutants. Her own mutant powers would manifest, and she would eventually lose her tribe and become bonded to the Phoenix Force. Ultimately resisting its dark temptations, she would go on to become one of the founding members of the Stone Age Avengers alongside Odin. While it was suggested that Lady Phoenix was actually the true mother of Thor, we learned in Avengers 1 million BC issue number 1 from 2022 that her relationship ended with Odin before Thor was born, with Gaia being Thor's natural mother as we knew before, Freya being Thor's adoptive mother, and Lady Phoenix being dubbed kinda like his bonus mother, after she helped Gaia give birth to Thor and saved him from a premature death. And then Gaia was like, you can be mother to Thor too. So we got that all figured out. Sorry what I said on part 1, it's not exactly true. Not his mother, well she is his mother, but she's not his only mother. He's got a lot of mothers. Number 4. Artemis. Artemis was also once Wonder Woman, don't you know? Back in the New Earth continuity. She herself is an Amazon, and despite her youthful appearance, like most Amazons, she's pretty old. In fact, in the New Earth continuity, she was also granted eternal youth as the result of a spell that Circe had cast upon her. In the Prime Earth continuity, she is just straight up immortal. She hails from the Bana Migdal, which is a splinter group of Amazons all their own. Like I said, there are many different tribes. Princess Diana of Themyscira and Artemis have often been presented as rivals in the comics, with Artemis often being jealous of Wonder Woman and kind of striving to prove herself superior to Diana. But despite this, she is ultimately a force for good and a hero, though her warrior's heart might be a little harder in comparison maybe to Diana's when it comes to her heroic approach. Number 3. Red Sonja. Red Sonja is an interesting one to think of as old, considering how she is often portrayed in the comics, but like Conan, who I touched on during the part 1 of this list, Sonja herself is also ancient in the sense that she hails from the past, the Hyborian Age. She was a creation of Robert E. Howard's, who initially existed within Marvel, but eventually ended up being moved over to Dynamite when it comes to who owns the right to this fiery, fierce warrior character. The Hyborian Age was actually a pastime in Marvel history, at least that is what we're led to believe based on the fact that both she and Conan hail from the reality of Earth 616. Red Sonja set out on her path to become a fierce fighter at a young age, after she was left orphaned when her family were killed and her people were attacked by a group of mercenaries. Red Sonja hails from Western Hyrcania and often fights to help those who cannot help themselves, even sometimes training those she comes across so that they might actually act as a hero in their own story. She is sometimes also a sword for hire, but generally only takes jobs that kind of fit with her own particular moral code. And she does have a moral code, even though she's a mercenary a lot of the times. Number 2. Shazam. Wait. Billy Batson is super old? No, we aren't talking about Shazam. No, not that Shazam. Not the Shazam formerly known as Captain Marvel. We're talking about the Wizard, who gave Billy Batson his powers and who has also been known by the name of Shazam. Initially in the Prime Earth continuity, we were led to believe that the Wizard was simply someone who bestowed powers on Billy, but we'd later learned that he was actually one of the old gods Shazam would actually get his powers from. This truth of the Wizard's, aka Mama Roggins, aka Shazam's origin would be revealed after Billy Batson was left depowered following the action of Grail, Darkseid's daughter, who basically cut off his access to his powers by untethering the old gods from his magic lightning. While not a direct superhero, the Wizard is a powerful force of good who was even able to help repower Billy from the afterworld in spirit form, finding basically new gods for him to be empowered by. Number 1. Eternal Warrior. Marvel and DC are not the only publishers who have ancient heroes. Even Dynamite, now owning Red Sonja, is not the only publisher with ancient superheroes by any stretch. A lot of people have ancient superheroes. In fact, one publisher that was suggested in the comments that has tons of ancient superheroes is Valiant Comics, so I'm happy to be talking to you about that. Great suggestion. This particular hero from Valiant that we're talking about is Gilad Anipada. Gilad was one of 4 siblings granted immortality. He has used this extended time over his life to train up, becoming a master in many different areas of combat. He acts as a hero in the comics, being tasked with defending the Geomancer of any given generation. Geomancers were kind of born in a line, and they're magical heroes in their own right who were chosen to act on behalf of the Earth as the planet's defender, and who are able to communicate with nature and the Earth. And the Eternal Warrior basically just acts as like their guardian, so heroes protecting heroes. Number 10. Vandal Savage. Vandal Savage is definitely one of the most ancient villains out there. It's actually kind of like his whole thing. Savage originally existed all the way back in the prehistoric ages, having initially been a caveman. He got his powers from a radioactive meteorite which granted him immortality and enhanced intelligence. Even way back then, he was fighting heroes like Batman, if you can believe it. This was after Batman was sent on some time adventures after facing off against Darkseid. While he was suspected as being dead, in reality Darkseid's Omega Sanction had simply banished Batman to wander through time, which actually kind of sounds nice to me, except that part of this punishment was that his lives that he would experience were all supposed to be, well, pretty awful. Still though, when facing off against Vandal Savage, even with Vandal's somewhat newfound powers, Batman won. I mean, you can be ancient and immortal, but that doesn't mean that you're immune from being beaten by Batman, right? Batman's got that plot armor, baby. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we're doing here on Top 10 Nerd, and you love when I talk about supervillains, I know I do, be sure to check out our supervillains playlist over on the channel for even more good villainous content. Number 9. Surtur. Surtur is not someone we think of too often or even touch on, but he's a pretty big deal in the comics, and in the Marvel Cinematic cinematic universe. I mean, in the MCU, he successfully managed to destroy Asgard, fulfilling his prophesized role in Ragnarok. And what's more, Thor knew that this was what needed to be done in order to stop his sister Hela. So despite facing off against Circe initially, he ended up having to be the one to free him so that the prophecy could actually be realized, sacrificing the place of Asgard in order to save the people of Asgard. In the comics, Circe is an ancient foe, having been the sworn enemy of Odin for, well, pretty much forever. He hails from Muspelheim, and even for years successfully stopped Odin from achieving an alliance between the people of Odin's own Asgardian tribe, the Aesir, and the other Asgardian tribe known as the Vanir. Number 8. Circe. Circe is amazing. Definitely one of my favorite ancient villains around, possibly one of my favorite DC villains of all time around. Being that she is also the Circe from ancient Greek myth, I think you can understand just how old she is. Circe is known for being a powerful witch, and in the Prime Earth continuity was also revealed to be one of Hecate's witch marked. Her insane magical ability is how she has been able to survive for so long, without also appearing to have aged much at all. However, I will also add that in the New Earth continuity, this is also thanks to the fact that Circe is actually descended from Titans, which not only makes her immortal and ageless, but also pretty durable as well. Circe is known for being a powerful Wonder Woman foe, but despite the fact that Wonder Woman is really well known among comic fans, I feel like her villains get less time in the spotlight for, I don't know, for some reason, despite the fact that Wonder Woman actually has a pretty stacked rogues gallery all her own. And like Circe, many of them also seem to have a rich and interesting history. Seriously, I feel like Circe could just have her own comic series. That's how much she has and has had going on throughout her life and throughout the comics. Number 7. Morgan Le Fay. Speaking of powerful witches, Morgan Le Fay is a villain we really don't get to showcase or focus on a lot on this channel, so I am taking this opportunity to remind you of just how ancient and how bad she is. Morgan Le Fay is a villain who hails originally from Arthurian legend and was adopted as a character in Marvel Comics all the way back in 1955, making her first appearance in Black Knight issue number 1. But of course, she's actually much older than 1955 in terms of her canon character history. Morgan Le Fay existed just after the ancient and mythical times of the island of Atlantis. In this version of the story, not all of the island was lost, and actually some islands that were part of Atlantis still existed, chiefly Avalon, which is where Morgan was born. Unfortunately, the remaining isles of Atlantis would eventually also be drowned and swallowed up by the sea, causing Morgan, her mother, and the man who would become known as Merlin to flee to Britain. This all happened before the 6th century, with Morgan eventually temporarily becoming Merlin's apprentice. As a villain, Morgan has not only tormented the people of her own time period, but she has also traveled to the present day and threatened the people and heroes of that time as well. Number 6. Barbatos. Barbatos is the Bat God, who basically helped Batman to become what he is today, but as part of his own dark machinations. At least, Barbatos claims to be that. According to Barbatos, he was the bat that appeared before Bruce the night that he decided to become Batman, inspiring the young Bruce Wayne to go on to don the cape and cowl, and becoming a major symbol for Batman. Barbatos was once the loyal ally of the World Forger. He was a dragon who would destroy worlds that were unstable, often built on fear, known as belonging to the Forge of Worlds. Barbatos, however, grew to enjoy destroying worlds so much that he actually decided to rebel against the World Forger so he could destroy more worlds, ultimately destroying his master, which allowed him to corrupt his Forge of Worlds, with it warping and ultimately becoming known by a name you might be more familiar with, the Dark Multiverse. Just as the World Forger is one of the oldest beings in the cosmos over at DC, so is his pet dragon gone rogue, Barbatos. Barbatos would go on to recruit others to his new purpose to destroy the main multiverse. Number 5. Morlun and the Inheritors. Morlun and the Inheritors sounds like the name of a band of vampires. Not a thing. A coven of vampires, really, I guess I should say. And no, I don't believe they play musical instruments and or perform in any kind of musical acts, sadly. Morlun and the Inheritors are a threat that we meet as we go into the Spider-Verse. They were the main antagonists of the Spider-Verse event in the comics, which promised to feature all the alternate Spider-Men, women, and folks that had ever featured. And they were also the main antagonists of the follow-up event, Spider-Geddon. The Inheritors are basically energy vampires that feed specifically on what is known as totemic life energy. What is that? What is a totem? It is usually a superpowered or somewhat unique individual who represents some kind of powerful animal instinct or arachnid avatar, like Spiders! Morlun specifically is well known for being a main villain of Spider-Man's, and while he's not as prominently featured as, some of other Spidey's villains, he is still particularly powerful. We don't really know, I don't think, how old the Inheritors or Morlun are, at least not in their first life, but we do know they're pretty old, having participated in fights in the multiverse seemingly a long time ago. Also, they'd like to dress up super Victorian, so they gotta at least be from that era or beyond. Although they're not necessarily Earth-based villains, they're multiversal villains. Number 4, Sin. Sin might be one that people are a little bit more familiar with in another form, but also there might be a lot of you out there who aren't, as this villain hails from the Spawn comics. If you are up to date with your Spawn reading, then you know who I'm talking about here, but for those of you who aren't up to date or who maybe have never read Spawn, this villain was actually formerly known as a longtime ally of Al Simmons' Spawn, his mentor in a way, Cogliostro. While initially just seeming like a well-meaning fellow Hellspawn, seeking to teach Al the ropes and also help to guide him away from being fully used as a pawn of Hell, Cogliostro is actually later revealed to be more ancient than we might have otherwise thought, in fact also being known by another name even before he was known as Cog. Cain. Yeah, the Cain, the man from biblical myth who killed his brother and was condemned for it, Cain of Cain and Abel. After revealing that he was really only helping Spawn to serve his own interests and becoming a villain, Cog was redeemed once more for a short little while before becoming a villain again, who has the ability to drain the power of other Hellspawns, being known now as Sin. Sin with 2 N's. Number 3, Rama-Tut. While we all know Kang the Conqueror now, thanks to him being featured in the MCU in Quantumania, and the hype for his inclusion in that film being very real, I would say at this point, not everyone is as familiar with the other versions of Nathaniel Richards from Earth 6311. Despite the fact that this is a villain from the future, Kang actually has existed across time in many different forms, adopting the form even of an ancient pharaoh. This was back when Kang was a ruler in ancient Egypt, before he was really even Kang. Nathaniel Richards became obsessed with the reality of Earth 616 and would eventually construct a time machine shaped like a sphinx and use it to travel back in time to around 2960 BC. Having brought with him a robotic army and advanced futuristic weapons, it wasn't long before Nathaniel was the ruler of Egypt, taking the name of Rama-Tut. This version of Nathaniel also became focused and obsessed on the creation of En-Sabah-Nur, who, as Rama-Tut knew, was destined to become the world's first mutant. Number 2, Perpetua. Perpetua is one of those characters who is super powerful and who tons of people should know about, really, just for that reason alone, I would say. But no. Instead, most folks know more about the Anti-Monitor, Perpetua's son, than they do about her. Granted, this could be because she's simply a newer character, and in that case, I mean, fair enough. She's a newer character, but she's also really old because she's kind of like a retcon character. Perpetua is known for being the first one to create the multiverse, or at least, one of the first people, depending on how you like to reconcile DC lore, because I feel like Perpetua isn't the first one that we've said that about. While Anti-Monitor is the character most well known for causing the Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's later revealed that Perpetua was the one truly pulling his strings, and therefore responsible for this crisis. In fact, Perpetua feeds off Crisis energy, and is said to have been responsible for all crises we've seen. At least all crises we've seen before Dark Crisis, likely, since I think she was dead when that one actually took place, so, or at least defeated. Is she still alive? I don't think so. Number 1, Rotath of Lemuria. Heading back to the Hyborian Age once again on one of our ancient lists, which by the way, if you want to visit the Hyborian Age again and again, you should check out part 1 and part 2 of our ancient superheroes list. We got you. Rotath of Lemuria is a common example of how magic was presented often in stories from the Hyborian Age, especially in regards to Conan's story there. Rotath made his first appearance in issue number 37 of Conan the Barbarian from the 70s, when everyone was into the sword and sorcery genre. In this same issue, Rotath was killed by Ghul after he was hired by the king of Lemuria, who was frightened of Rotath's power. As he died though, Rotath cursed both the king and Ghul, casting a spell so that he might return. And so he did, this time in a golden body, but still he ended up being defeated, this time not by Ghul directly, but instead of course after fighting Conan and Juma, and also being defeated by a giant slug, which that part is a little random, but hey, I'll take it.
Number 10, the Immortal. With a name like the Immortal, you bet your socks this guy has been around for a hot minute. Due to an accident that happened approximately 3,000 years ago, the man who became the Immortal was exposed to an unknown anomaly that gave him superhuman abilities that put him almost on par with Viltrumites, making him one of the 3 known beings in the universe that can make that claim. But outside of his incredible strength, speed, durability, stamina, and flight powers, the Immortal is, you guessed it, immortal. Able to regenerate at an insanely fast rate, regrowing limbs and organs, not needing food, water, or oxygen to survive, and being immune to all poisons, toxins, venoms, viruses, bacteria, parasites, pathogens, and allergens. However, funnily enough, there is a way to, quote, kill him. If the Immortal's head is separated from his torso, it needs to be manually reattached for his healing factor to activate. But despite that, even when they aren't attached, he still remains perfectly preserved until the reattachment happens. He's been around for so long that he's been a knight possibly under King Arthur as Lancelot, an explorer under or possibly as Christopher Columbus in the Spanish Armada. He fought in the American Revolution, became president of the United States by taking the alias of this guy Abraham Lincoln you might have heard of, and he fought as a soldier in the First World War. In the 1930s is when he officially became a superhero and more recently became a member of the Guardians of the Globe.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Hey. Click it! Number 9, The Darkness. The story featuring this host of The Darkness is so vicious and bloody, but also just so raw and emotional. I love it personally. While many think of a Jackie Estacado when they think of The Darkness, he is not the only host The Darkness entity has ever had, which honestly, if you're familiar with the story of Jackie, you probably also kind of know that because, you know, it gets passed down. In fact, there were many who came before Jackie. Case in point, Estacado, the Darkness host who is a leader of a Visigoth tribe during the final days of the ancient Roman Empire, circa 410 BC, after its downfall had really already begun, and some would say even kind of already concluded, I guess. Estacado is a known rebel against the Roman Empire, and a powerful one at that, wielding the Darkness in his fight against the last standing Roman legions. He ends up going head to head with Legatus and his legion after already dying and being resurrected by the Darkness twice. While he offers Legatus a chance to surrender, Legatus knows he is doomed either way since the Roman Empire is coming to an end, and so chooses not to back down as he doesn't really see surrendering as a real option given the punishment for doing so, were they even able to make it back home at this point. As such, Legatus's legion falls and Estacado makes plans to march with his tribe to Rome.
Number 8, Ogon Bat. Okay, Ogon Bat is a unique and cool character in his own right, but he was also one of the world's first superheroes ever, even technically coming before Superman. Originating from Japan as the god of justice and protector of the weak, his origin is that he was originally an Atlantean who was sent forward in time 10,000 years to defend the modern world from evil. He wields a scepter that fires bolts of energy, causes mini earthquakes, and slices through steel. He himself was immortal, could fly, breathe underwater, had X-ray vision, and possessed superhuman strength, speed, and invulnerability to bullets and lasers. He was summoned by a little girl who would call on him, causing a sparkle to appear around, which then turned into a bat and then turned into the hero when it found its enemy. It's very weird, but we just roll with it. While he initially started as a comic, he also has a TV show that appeared in several different countries outside of Japan, and I think he looks really cool. So, yeah.
Number 7, Cosmic Ghost Rider. Cosmic Ghost Rider is an interesting one. While I initially thought of the prehistoric Ghost Rider, Ghost, when it came to old Ghost Riders, I realized that despite being from an alternate future, Cosmic Ghost Rider is also ancient. But you know, future ancient. Cosmic Ghost Rider is the spirit of Frank Castle, who ends up becoming the spirit of vengeance after he is killed during Thanos' invasion of Earth. In this version of the story, Thanos succeeds in basically destroying Earth, and by the time Frank returns as Ghost Rider to the planet's surface, it's kinda too late for him to save his friends. He ends up alone on the planet, and after years and years of solitude with no one left to avenge, becomes, well, insane, as I think pretty much almost anyone would. Despite eventually becoming Thanos' herald, CGR is really doing his best to be a good guy. He only ever really even joined up with Thanos because, you know, well, there was no one left and he didn't want to be alone. Before even joining up with Thanos, Cosmic Ghost Rider did attempt to get his revenge on the Mad Titan, teaming up with Galactus, but even Galactus fell in this fight against this alternate King Thanos.
Number 6, Exodus. Grand Duke Benny du Paris was a 12th century nobleman from medieval France. Does that count as ancient? I don't know, anyone who was around then, so I'm taking it and just running with it, okay? Cool. What you gonna do about it? Nothing, because I'm just an image on your screen. As an adult, Bene was a crusader for the Knights Templar sent to Jerusalem during the Crusades, and he even became best friends with Eobar Garrington, the Black Knight of that era. The two had set out on a quest to find the Tower of Power, when his abilities manifested after an encounter with the Phoenix Force, which were then improved further thanks to the mutant apocalypse. But thanks to Big Blue, Exodus was trapped in a tomb until the modern day when he was awoken by Magneto and joined his cause. Exodus is one of the most powerful psionic mutants in existence, with such a pristine use of telekinesis and telepathy that he can even alter electrons and molecules. His power is so strong that Marvel even had to debuff him by making his powers dependent on his or others' level of faith in this mutant, although he still regularly kicks some serious butt.
Number 5, the Old Guard. Can we call the Old Guard heroes? I'm not really 100% sure on that. They're ancient warriors who've been many things over the years. Not all the things they've done were necessarily good, but I would say for the most part, they've tried to stay on the side of good, so I think I'm gonna count them for this list. And that's definitely where they are at when it comes to where we meet them in the modern day. Or at least, you know, the direction they're headed towards, I would say. Initially, the Old Guard were a group of immortal mercenaries led by their oldest member, Andy, aka Andromache of Scythia, who is thousands of years old. It is in their welcoming of a new member that we get to see some of the good in them, despite them being essentially expensive, deadly, and nearly indestructible guns for hire. Their immortality is as much a mystery to them as it is to readers of the series, seemingly happening to each member miraculously and really without explanation. One minute they were alive, the next dead, and then inexplicably right back to living. In 2020, the Old Guard comics got their first film adaptation through Netflix. As with most Greg Rucka creations, the premise and his approach had me hooked, pretty much.
Number 4, Medieval Spawn. Okay, I'm gonna come right out and say this, I know nothing about Spawn. I did not watch the show, I never read the comics, I really have no right to be standing here in front of you talking about him, but I'm doing it anyways. Don't worry, I'm not actually talking about the Spawn. I'm going to be talking about Medieval Spawn. Naturally, Medieval Spawn was not only a hell spawn, but also a knight living in 16th century England. And if you think about it, knights were almost like medieval superheroes, with tales and stories all their own. Sir John of York fought during a civil war in England, but was released from his service to Henry II after he and 3 others mistook the king's anger for orders and went and took the life of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, once he passed at the hands of his king's bodyguards, he was sent to hell for his crimes, where he made a deal with Malbolgia and returned as a hellspawn. He then went around England committing good deeds in the hopes of redeeming himself, but he continues to survive after being basically bonded to his armor and now possessing anyone who chooses to don his helmet. And I need to start reading Spawn. Right now.
Number 3, Witchblade. While most people think of Sarah Pizzini when they think of the Witchblade, Sarah was not the only one to wield the blade, and was, in fact, by far the first. One of the oldest Witchblade wielders was actually Samantha. Samantha hails from ancient Roman times, though she herself is not Roman, but instead was a native of an old Celtic town that they overtook named Cecilia. At least I think its name was Cecilia. There's also a character in the story with her that's named Cecilia, so that's a little confusing, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. Samantha was enslaved, but would eventually escape and end up running into druids out in the countryside, who believed she was the one who would be destined to save the other Celts from the Romans. She was given the Witchblade and would set out on a mission to destroy all Romans. While a hero ultimately, I would say, at least of her own story, Samantha's tale and alignment is pretty complex, which is often what makes Witchblade hosts like her so interesting.
Number 2, Martian Manhunter. You know, I didn't actually know how old Martian Manhunter is. I knew that he was the last of his race of Martians, and I know that he is extremely powerful and should never be slept on. And I know that he speaks with the resolve and intelligence of someone who has seen some serious shiznit. But when I found out that according to DC, he is in the ballpark of around or over 220 million years old, I gotta say, I took a moment to just digest that. John Johns, or John Jones if you want to be rude and go by his human name, arrived on Earth after he was pulled there by a teleportation beam during an experiment conducted by Dr. Saul Erdel, who brought him through space and time and then passed away from the shock of actually finding a Martian. This is because John's race was practically wiped out a long time ago, leaving him completely alone and isolated. But now on Earth, with no one to tell him what the hell was going on, he eventually used his shapeshifting abilities to become a detective operating in Middletown, America. For a long time, he mainly operated from the safety of his human persona before he eventually exposed himself to the world and became a founding member of the Justice League, and also one of its most powerful members. Just saying.
Number 1. Ghost Rider. Way before Johnny Blaze was even ever born, there was Ghost. Ghost is the original Ghost Rider, or at least believed to be the original Ghost Rider, the initial spirit of vengeance. Retroactively anyways, as he made his first comic book appearance after Johnny Blaze historically, appearing in Marvel Legacy issue number 1 from 2017. So obviously that's pretty recent, but you know, canonically one of the first. Ghost became the first Ghost Rider during the prehistoric era and did so in order to defeat the mysterious Wendigo, who took over his pack, becoming their leader only to eat the pack members save for Ghost. Ghost would stumble upon a snake and speak its real name in order to become Ghost Rider, the spirit of vengeance. He also has a cool mammoth, or he had a cool mammoth, and then he got another mammoth, and I think that mammoth's gone too, but he likes mammoths. He would go on to join up with the Avengers of 1 million BC.